By no means. We have the gospel that we preach. Looking at the life of Paul and learning from it, what does it tell us? What it tells us is that when Paul preached in the name of Jesus, and doing it within the Jewish context in which he came from, Paul made sure that when he preached the message, that he related to people as he always related to them. Paul was real big on that when he went to start to build churches, that he wanted to make sure, although he could do this, he did not go begging around for people to give an income to him. Paul had a job. He worked for a living. And by working for a living, it wasn't just the fact that he was raising his own funds. Y'all remember what kind of job Paul did? What did Paul do for a living? He was a tent maker. And when he would go into a place like Corinth, and when he built that church, started from the ground up, the fact that he was a tent maker put him in with the laborers of that day. Paul worked with the poor. For those of us who were talking about Corinthians not too long ago, the Corinthian community that was started were almost the poorest of the poor. And for them, when they worked, they had to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and after 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, no days off, they barely had enough money to eat. Preaching Jesus Christ as Lord, Paul was in there with them, making his tents, making a living. But in the midst of making that living, Paul was witnessing. Paul was teaching and spreading the good news of Jesus. He wasn't inviting them to churches per se, although they would start a church. But he was starting from the ground up. He was communicating the gospel where people were at that time. And then from communicating that gospel, then he tried to establish a community. Sometimes we've gotten into the mindset now that in building churches and proclaiming to Jesus, what we do is we invite people to church. Come to our church and we're going to learn about Jesus. But that really kind of goes counter to what Paul was doing, and that Paul was doing his teaching within the context of his work. It was relating one-on-one. And in that context, he was inviting them to help establish a new community. And you know that would be risky today, right? It wasn't really any less risky back then.